You see the images, right? The heartbreaking pictures of loss and destruction. We all agree war is a human tragedy. But there's always been this quiet, unsettling idea that just won't go away. The idea that maybe, just maybe, all that destruction is somehow good for business. So let's just ask it, head on. Is it true? Can blowing things up actually lead to prosperity? We're going to really dig into this, because the truth is way more complex and, frankly, way more shocking than you probably think.
You know, if you ask almost anyone for proof, they'll point to the exact same thing: World War II. The story we all learn is that this massive global conflict is what finally dragged the world out of the Great Depression. And honestly, when you first glance at the numbers, it's kind of hard to argue with that.
And that is what created this huge myth that war is like the ultimate shot of adrenaline for an economy. It creates jobs, it pushes innovation into overdrive, and it gets the government spending money like there's no tomorrow. But here's the thing. That whole idea, it's built on a massive and honestly pretty dangerous misunderstanding of what an economy is even for.
All right, the great economic myth. Let's really put that whole World War II argument under a microscope. How can something that seems so obvious actually be a giant illusion?
Okay, so here's the big number, the one that fuels this whole idea. From 1940 to 1945, the GDP of the United States, basically the value of everything the country made, skyrocketed by an insane 72%. Factories were humming, unemployment basically disappeared. Case closed, right? Well, not exactly. That number is hiding a really big secret.
To get it, you need to understand this classic idea in economics called the broken window fallacy. It's actually super simple when you think about it. Imagine a kid throws a rock and breaks a baker's window. You might think, hey, that's good for the economy. Now the baker has to pay a glassmaker to fix it, the glassmaker then has money to spend, and so on. But what we're not seeing is what the baker was going to do with that money. Maybe he was going to buy a new oven or hire an assistant. The economy didn't get richer, it just wasted resources to get back to where it started. And that right there is the huge problem with looking at those wartime numbers. Yeah, the government was spending a ton of money, but it was spending it on things designed to destroy. Every single dollar spent building a tank was a dollar that wasn't spent building a tractor. Every factory making bombs was a factory not making cars or refrigerators. You gotta remember, the whole point of an economy is to make our lives better. War, well, it does the exact opposite. So, that's the deal for a country fighting a war somewhere else. But what happens when the fight is right in your own backyard? Oh man, then the economic picture gets just devastatingly clear. So economists have this really critical distinction they make. There's a huge difference between being a belligerent, so a country that's just participating in the war, and being the war site, the place where the bombs are actually dropping. For the belligerent, the costs might be manageable, but for the war site, it's absolute ruin. You don't have to look far for an example. Just look at Ukraine. In the first year of the invasion, its economy didn't grow. It collapsed by almost a third. That's not a stimulus, that's an economic apocalypse. This isn't just a broken window anymore. The entire country becomes the broken window. And look, Ukraine isn't some rare exception. When you study hundreds of conflicts, you see the same brutal pattern for the countries that are the battleground. Their economy shrinks, their factories and farms get blown up, their workforce is shattered by death and people fleeing for their lives. And on top of all that, debt and inflation just spiral completely out of control. It is, by every single measure, a total disaster.
Okay, so if war is so clearly a disaster for almost everyone, why on earth does it keep happening? Well, like any good mystery, you just have to follow the money.
And trust me, this is not some new radical idea. Major General Smedley Butler, one of the most decorated U.S. Marines of all time, said this almost 100 years ago. He laid it out plain and simple. War is a racket, a vicious system designed to make a select few incredibly rich off the suffering of everyone else.
So here's how that racket works. It's this perfect looping cycle that even President Eisenhower warned about. Step 1, the government spends billions on defense contracts. Step 2, the private companies that get those contracts see their profits and stocks go through the roof. Step 3, they then turn around and use some of that cash to lobby politicians for policies that favor more conflict, which, what a surprise, creates a need for more weapons. The system literally feeds itself.
And history is just filled with examples where the reasons they told us for a war were just a cover for cold, hard cash. The Opium Wars,
That wasn't about ideas. That was about Britain forcing an entire country to buy its drugs just to fix a trade imbalance. The banana wars in Central America? That was literally the US military acting as a private security force for a fruit company. The first Gulf War? Sure, liberating Kuwait was part of it, but it was really about making sure one guy didn't control the world's oil supply. And the fight over microchips today? It's all about who controls the 21st century's most important resource.
But here's where it gets even bigger. The impact of war isn't just about the countries fighting, or even the companies selling weapons. In our world today, one single conflict can send tremors across the entire globe, like instantly. See, our whole global system has a weak spot, a major Achilles heel: economic choke points. Think of them like the tiny arteries that the lifeblood of global trade has to pump through. These are straits, canals, tiny little passages, and if you pinch one off, the whole system starts to shut down. You want to know how vulnerable we are? Just think about this one spot, the Strait of Hormuz. It's a tiny strip of water, yet every single day, 21%, more than a fifth of the entire planet's oil supply has to squeeze through that little gap. A conflict there doesn't just cause a little problem, it could trigger a massive global recession.
So what happens when one of these choke points gets threatened? Total chaos, almost instantly. Supply chains don't just slow down, they shatter. The price of things like oil and grain goes completely wild. Investors panic and pull their money out of anything that looks risky, and capital just vanishes from entire regions overnight.
Okay, so after that first wave of panic, something else starts to happen. A big, long-term shift. Experts call it the Great Reallocation. Countries and companies start to look at their supply chains and realize how fragile they are, and they start moving them. It's basically them saying, okay, we can't rely on getting our stuff from there anymore. Let's move production to countries that are on our team. It's called friendshoring, and it literally redraws the entire economic map of the world.
And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, the real reason, the ultimate economic purpose of war. And it's much bigger than just profits or supply chains.
Because here's the deepest, most important truth about the economics of war. It's not just about breaking things or disrupting markets. It's the ultimate tool for redesigning the entire system. It's about taking the old rulebook, tearing it to shreds, and writing a whole new one. And guess who gets to write it? The winner.
I mean, just think about it. The whole system we live in right now, the IMF, the World Bank, the fact that the US dollar is the king of all currencies, none of this was dreamed up in some peaceful conference. It was built piece by piece on top of the ashes of World War II by the victors to make sure they stayed the winners for decades to come.
So let's go back to the original question. Is war good for the economy? No, absolutely not. It is a catastrophe for most people. But, and this is the big but, it is an unbelievable tool for a tiny few to get incredibly rich and incredibly powerful. And that leaves us with one last, really chilling question. The question isn't if war is about economics. The real question is, after all the smoke clears, who gets to hold the pen?